Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We have a special guest with us here today. This is Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects. It's great to see you.
Yeah, Mitch. I know we've been trying to get here for a while, and we're finally here. So it's great to.
Yeah, welcome to. I'd shake your hand, but we're all the way across the room
we'll
here.
Like
a virtual shake, right?
Yeah.
So, man, welcome to Sweetwater. We're glad to have Vertex here. Like you said, you and I have been talking about these pedals for a number of years.
Yeah. I was really fortunate that the timing worked out, and now we're here. So I'm really excited. I've been watching your videos, of course, for years and years and years. And, it feels, it's surreal, here.
That's awesome. And you're just in time for Gear Fest next week, right?
That's right.
Yeah, perfect timing. Perfect timing. So, man, there's so many cool pedals. We have the whole assortment here.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about, pretty much you can cover the whole gamut of things with what you've got here as far as guitar tones. The ones that, of course, they all are intriguing, but I want to talk to you specifically about some of the newer stuff that you have.
Please.
As well as your approach to how you recreate the various amp tones.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with, I think the Nile is the newest one, right?
Nile is the newest one, yeah. So the idea here is, I'm really a huge fan, as you can see by the name, although spelled a little bit differently. Nile Rodgers is kind of for me, one of the guitar icons, especially for clean tones. And also Prince, two of those guys, they had similar kind of funk tones, but they were really, really great. But one thing that they did stylistically when they would record is they would always use a studio rack compressor, and then they would go into kind of a classic mic pre, and they would use those two sort of synergistically to get a really specific clean tone. Now, they usually went direct on a lot of those things, but if you use this through a tube amp, you just impart the color of the tube amp, and it just sort of enhances even more of what you already have. And so the idea was really to be able to pay homage to that tone, and also be able to just give players the ability to sort of have like a studio tool that could be on their pedal board, that could accept a guitar, at instrument level, or they could use this at line or mic level and use this as an outboard piece, as part of their recording setup.
Right, nice. And as you were telling me earlier, you went to great lengths to find the gear. That they used to get those tones into this pedal.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine has an old Westlake recording console, and it had a Neve mic pre that was installed in, and so he allowed me to kind of figure out exactly the secret sauce of that particular mic pre, and so we built kind of an abbreviated version of it that I thought kind of best suited the guitar instrument, and gave some basic controls for volume, gain, and EQ, really focusing on the mid-range because it's sort of the really critical sort of tone, obviously, with guitar being a mid-range instrument. So kind of between maybe about 800 and about 1.6K is kind of the sweet spot in that EQ control. And then of course we have the classic compressor dials, with the ratio, and there's a 3-way treble cut and attack control, volume, and then you have a sustain. And you can get some really, classic compression sounds out of it. You can get some great chicken picking sounds. But the cool sort of secret sound is actually when you cascade them. And so you crank the kind of compressor side, and then you attenuate with the mic pre side, and you let it distort the mic pre. It just has this beautiful kind of even harmonic distortion tone. It's really, really cool.
Right. Do you recommend that with a humbucker equipped guitar, or do you, of course, those guys play, Nile plays a Strat. And,
yeah, so the cool thing about it is that you're not going to be encumbered. Usually we don't think of compressors being used effectively on humbucking style guitars. But on this, because you have that second EQ, you can actually dial out a lot of that mud, because sometimes it can become too pointed in the mid-range. You already have a little bit of woofiness in a humbucker pickup naturally. So one cool thing that I recommend that people do is they use the mic pre-side and they use the EQ there to maybe cut out some of the mids so that it doesn't have quite as pointed of a mid-range, and then maybe use the treble control and flip it up into the plus position where it's boosting maybe more around 2K. And so that really kind of helps. Just like a studio tool, you might use a 1176 or a DBSX compressor in the studio on a humbucking guitar, but you would never typically use one on a pedal board in most cases. So this allows you sort of the benefit of almost having like a mastering effect, that you could use on a Les Paul or a 335 and not have the drawbacks of just adding, more mud to the sound.
Right. Yeah. Plus it allows you to take your Les Paul or your 335 to a gig, and when you need to play a funky rhythm or get that type of a tone, step on the switch and you're right there.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. The other one that caught my eye recently is the Toneseeker.
Oh yeah.
And I like that you have considered the way most overdrive pedals sound best, which is into an amp that's slightly broken up.
Yeah, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's really just it's sort of the context for the tube screamer. We all know the Tube Screamer, and some of us have love or hate relationships with it. But my idea with the Toneseeker was really providing the environment where Tube Screamers really sound best, because a lot of times, we hear Tube Screamers and we only see them in isolation, and we kind of don't see all the parts of the whole. And when you look at the guys who most effectively use Tube Screamers, whether it's John Mayer or Stevie Ray Vaughan and guys like that, they almost always invariably were going into a 6L6 clean amp that was really cranked and on the verge of breakup. And if you look at the way that they set their Tube Screamers, they really didn't use any of the gain. They really were using it almost as a mid boost to tighten up an amp that's naturally pretty scooped.
Right.
And so what I did here is I built sort of a super reverb or a blackface style preamp that was being hit by the mid-boost section of a Tube Screamer. So we're not using any of the gain that would typically be associated with the Tube Screamer, but we're using the EQ and the volume control, and then the gain is just set at a set rate. And so you can control how cranked you want sort of the amp side to be. There's a preamp volume on there, and then there's also a grit control, so you can basically adjust how much of the input of the amp side you want to distort versus how much of the output side, and then you have your middle and treble controls to kind of help adjust that. And the cool thing is that you don't have to have a blackface Fender amp to really benefit from this. Even if you had a Vox, you could just take the mid-range out, since that's already providing a lot of your mid-range, and you can get those great Stevie Ray Vaughan or Kenny Wayne Shepherd type tones and really do it that way. So I really think for people who have had a difficult time with Tube Screamers, this is going to be a great thing for them, because it allows them to adjust all the individual sort of assets that make up that whole sound that we really know and love.
Nice, yeah, and again, just increasing the versatility of the rig.
Yeah.
Right? Having that there and being able to dial in for whatever amp you're using and
Right.
whatever situation. So that's,
Exactly.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So I guess while we're talking about gain pedals, let's talk about the Boost. That's one of your most popular pedals.
Yeah, it's sort of been our classic. It's the first individual Vertex branded product that we came out with. I think it's been out since 2014. And Robin Ford was one of the big people that really helped us launch this pedal, because he was such a fan. He had all of the prototype versions on his pedal board, and why he likes and why so many other studio musicians use this, whether it's Tim Pierce or Michael Thompson or all these guys that we've heard on all the classic recordings, they really like it because of what it doesn't do. It only increases the volume of whatever is going on, and it doesn't color in any way. So even if you just turn the Boost totally counterclockwise and turn it on and off, you would hear no change in the tonality, the level, anything like that. And then as you add up, to 16 decibels is the max output it does, you'll just get more volume, and it just helps the amp just do what it already does. It'd almost be like walking back and turning up your amp manually, but you can have it on the foot switch there to get a nice solo boost, and you can use it to even distort a low wattage amp if you wanted it to kind of have natural tube preamp distortion into the input. You can kind of crank it on the Boost and lower the volume on your tube amp and kind of simulate kind of a natural broken up sound without having to make your neighbors angry and upset.
Right.
So it has a lot of different options there, and then it also has an expression port, so you can put an expression pedal into it and use it as a volume control, and it keeps the volume pedal isolated from the rest of the pedal board, so you don't have that typical volume pedal tone suck, because the impedance is no longer being impacted by the accompanying volume pedal that would be in the signal path, so you don't get that kind of roll-off sound that happens a lot with passive volume pedals.
Right, right. So do you recommend then when you're using it as basically a volume pedal, can you set it for unity gain? So it
yeah,
it's
so
not
the
boosting?
cool thing about it is when you bypass the Boost, it automatically sets the volume pedal to unity gain. So it acts ostensibly as a normal volume pedal would,
okay.
and then when you turn it on, the volume pedal now has the range in its sweep to whatever number of decibels you've set it to increase.
Nice.
So you still have your volume pedal as you know and love it, but it's like you also then just added up to another 16 decibels available in that sweep of the volume pedal lever. So it's pretty cool in that respect.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. It's interesting because, of course, the amp that Robin Ford is best known for has a boost function on it,
Yep.
but it works by defeating the
tone stack. Yeah.
And so you get the increase in gain, but you also lose your tone control.
Right.
And so this really gives you the option with an amp like that, of
Yeah.
course with any other amp as well, to still have the flavor and the tone that you like, but just to make more of it.
Yeah, and the cool thing, you mentioned Robin Ford, and I've mentioned him too. Is he actually talks about how much he loves the buffer in this thing. He's like, man, with nothing else, just the buffer alone is really fantastic. And it's a very neutral buffer. It's actually the same as the Boost circuit, just at unity gain,
Right.
and it's just always running. So it allows you to maintain the fidelity of your signal path. If you need, to have a buffer at the end of your chain, and you also want to have the advantages of a clean boost, it's great to have on there, and you don't have to sacrifice any of your tone, and it just kind of serves almost like the triple purpose. You can use it with volume pedal, you can use it as a boost, and you can use it as a buffer.
Yeah, far more versatile than you'd think with just being a boost.
Right, you see one knob, and you're like, oh man,
Yeah.
it seems like a, what's the value? And I have to say, it's been a great seller for us, and it's been such a utility pedal that professionals really get it. And I think once we convince hobbyists, or we kind of show hobbyists about what the assets are, it's a no-brainer. It's a really great asset to have on your rig.
All right, very cool, very cool. So 3 of the intriguing pedals here are based on amplifiers that most people will never get their hands on, never get to actually play through.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the process of working with the D and T style amps, we'll say.
Yeah.
You've got 2 different flavors of Dumble and then the train wreck. It had to be something to get those amps in and to duplicate them with the pedals.
Yeah, so we'll start with the Ultraphonics closest to you. That was almost a 4-year process of really about trying to find the amplifiers, because the thing that I felt was missing from, there's some other great D-style pedals that exist out there, undoubtedly. Mm-hmm. And to me, I just wanted to say that, I did the exhaustive research of really making sure that we found as many examples of the D-style amp as possible, because everybody says when you're talking about Dumbles, it's like, well, which one? Mm-hmm. Because they were such customized amps. And so my idea was basically to sort of try to calibrate as best as I could across multiple eras and be able to say, okay, well, we can emulate a 70s style through, contemporary Dumbles. Now, I wasn't able to find one past the 90s, mm-hmm. but I was able to get one from a 70s, 80s, and 90s generation. And I was able to use those essentially through, comparing our prototypes through a hot rod DeVille, and then I would just A/B between them. Mm-hmm. And we were pretty fortunate that quite a few of our customers are already Dumble owners and knew of other Dumble owners. So it was just a matter of sort of enrolling them in the idea that we would try to create a pedal off of it. Now that's a difficult task in and of itself, because people are very protective of that sound, and understandably, they don't want to devalue their amp by having a pedal that can do close to the same thing for less money. But I think those that were open-minded to it and understood, and I will never claim that this will ever, replicate a Dumble completely. A Dumble is an incredible amp for a reason,
Sure.
But many of us, as you said, we can't drop $100,000, a house essentially,
right.
in an amplifier. So this is what I believe is the closest to that sound, in being able to approximate multiple different generations. And we have some demos showing it side by side against one of Jackson Brown's old Dumbles, which is a 50-water that I was told that was used on some of the classic recordings that David Lindley and stuff like that would have played on. And that was a fantastic amp, and we got really, really close. We put this through a Jim Kelly clean amp, like a newer version of it, and then going side by side with the Dumble combo, and it was pretty dang close. It was pretty dang close. And in fact, when we played it to some people, they, only maybe half the time would they guess, which one was which. So to me, if I can fool somebody half the time, I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I've watched some of those videos where you do the comparison with the real amp, if you will, and also where you're emulating the tones of players and
right. Yeah, we did a Larry Carlton sort of side by side. Yeah,
it's almost seems random whether they get it right or not.
Yeah,
in those situations. So that's very cool. So the steel string is another flavor of D-style amp.
Yeah, so most of us know the D-style amp is the overdrive sound. But there's this other side of it, which is kind of like the big clean tones. And so the amp that we were trying to emulate was called the Steel String Singer. And that was popularized by Stevie Ray Vaughan to start with. And I think he actually used one that belonged to Jackson Brown for some of those David Bowie recordings, back on Let's Dance, And then, subsequently became a staple in his rig. And then, of course, John Mayer on Continuum and subsequent albums has been, a huge user of the Steel String Singer sound. And one of our clients owns the very first one ever made. It's a combo, 100 watt. And it sounds incredible. It's essentially like the biggest, most beautiful just really complex harmonically clean Fender sound where it kind of gets drivey, but it still stays clean at the same time. It's like this paradox of two things, like how can it be clean but dirty all at the same time?
Right.
And this really encompasses that. And we spent a lot of time, sort of the same process, going back and forth between a hot rod DeVille. I just try to, choose something that was pretty accessible as far as a clean amp sound is concerned. And then just went back and forth and tried to dial those tones as closely as possible. And we were very fortunate to have access to that sound and have the ability to be able to even get in front of one, because my understanding is there's only about 13 of them that were made, and there's few of them that are actually still in circulation. I know that some of them had been damaged or stolen over time, so to have access to one was a pretty golden opportunity, and the result has been great. This has been one of our best-selling pedals we've ever put out, and really, not just looks at a name, but really delivers on the tone.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the T-Drive.
Yeah, T-Drive, all right. So this is like, when I was a kid, Dumble and Trainwreck were sort of like neck and neck for like, if you wanted to go more the high gain territory, you were into Brad Paisley, you'd go with the T-Drive, or the Trainwreck style sound, and if you were into Santana or Stevie Ray Vaughan, you might go, or Larry Carlton, you go with the Dumble vibe. And so this is the Trainwreck style, and for people who don't know about him, obviously Ken Fisher was the inventor of it, and Dr. Z had worked closely with him subsequently and has done some similar amps, which people can get here at Sweetwater.
That's right, yeah.
And so I tried to do the best that I could to kind of go through the same process. I had access to an Express, and that's kind of more of the Marshall-y style vibe, and really tried to create that sound in a box. And I would say the thing that about Trainwrecks to me that most stood out, and what was actually the hardest to recreate, is they can go from clean, like bone clean with your volume rolled back, to mean, like almost metal levels of distortion with just your volume knob. That they are so dynamic and so touch sensitive that, like an amp that has metal levels of gain can be used by a guy like Mark Knopfler, who I don't know if he's ever played a distorted note in his life, but he plays so dynamically that an amp like that just really works for him. And so how I would best describe this is sort of the sonic terrain of maybe like a Plexi and maybe a little bit of AC30, but with the gain range that could really approximate anything from Mark Knopfler, it could go to Brad Paisley or Keith Urban, and then on the extreme almost have like a Metallica amount of gain on tap. Now I wouldn't say that it would be, I don't know that EQ-wise that it really matches up with that, but it has that level of gain where you can really do like a full-out, rock concert with this, and it would have that type of tone. But I think where it really excels is somewhere in the middle, kind of like, and I like to think of it like an AC/DC kind of Angus Young style amount of gain. I think is really where it sits best. You can roll up to that with your volume knob. You can roll it back and you get some nice clean dynamics. You can really get some nice jangle out of it. That kind of AC30-ish vibe comes through where you can hear kind of that 2K chime up to that kind of 5K sort of presence come through. And it's really a beautiful pedal for that. If you're using a Tele or a Strat or something that has that natural jangle, it just really brings that out and also gives it sort of like that big depth and breadth that sometimes is difficult to get with a Strat or a Tele sometimes, especially when you're at lower volumes or you've cleaned it up. So I think it does a really great job of encompassing that vibe. And I didn't have, of course, the number of amplifiers. I only had access to one, but it was very, very close to not just the reaction, but the feel, the compression, and kind of the percussiveness of the distortion that is quintessentially Trainwreck.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, you mentioned dynamics a number of times there, and I guess the last pedal we have up here is the dynamic drive.
Right. We have the dynamic distortion, and yeah, we did mention dynamics, and this is definitely similar to the Trainwreck and how it interacts dynamically, but EQ-wise, I would sort of I'd equivocate this more with like a Rat style like distortion, where it has a kind of more of like a 2K emphasis with the tone control, so it can get pretty bright if you want that. But if you roll it back, it gets this really sort of beautiful, like creamy, almost like when I think of like early Santana, like Europa type tones, where it has that sustain and it has sort of that bigness. And one thing that it does really well with the dynamic distortion for like rock and kind of like distortion tones is it really kind of has that big low end that like a 412 would impart. And if you're using small amps, sometimes it's difficult to get the low end presence to really react like a bigger amp, because so much of like the arena rock tone, whether you're talking about Journey or any of the classic bands, Van Halen, so much of that is just about moving air, and it's difficult to make a convincing distortion sound that doesn't move that type of air. And so this has that low end presence where you really feel the hit, almost like a 412, how it hits you in the chest, like at a rock concert. It has that bigness in the low end, and it's very convincing when you're standing even in front of a Princeton and you're running this through it. It's like a 10-inch speaker sounds like a 412, and it hits you like that. And so that's the real beauty of what this does, is it doesn't just deliver on the distortion end, it delivers on the feel. And then when you record it, for those who are on the pro audio side, it feels like and sounds like recorded like a 412 cabinet, even if you're using kind of like a dinky, Princeton or even a Champ or something like that. It really delivers on that sound and feel. So I'm really proud of the way that turned out. And distortion is not as popular of a sound as overdrive is typically, but when you turn this on and you roll it back, you can get some great shades of overdrive, and then you can bring it up similarly to the T-Drive and get some really big, fat, warm, kind of like higher gain tones and kind of everything in between. So it's almost like there's 4 or 5 pedals in there depending on where you rotate your volume knob on your guitar.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Man, you've got the gamut of tone-producing tools here. It really does cover that whole thing.
Well, I like to think that we vetted them really well. We're lucky that we're in a place in California that is replete with great session musicians and artists, and so we get to bounce these ideas off of people every day. It's like you're on a university campus and everybody's just, a classroom away to just get feedback and advice from some of the best players in the world, and that really informs the type of stuff that we do and the choices that we make. So we're very fortunate to be not only here at Sweetwater, but in the location that we are in proximity to all these great, musicians.
That's awesome. Man, we're so glad you're here.
Likewise.
Can't wait to dig in and play through all these pedals. I think it's going to be a lot of fun checking them out. I expect that they're going to end up on my pedal board too, which is a good thing.
That would be an honor.
Well, right on, man. Thanks so much for taking time to sit down with us today. I know you're heading up to show these to all the sales engineers, and but thank you for giving us the tour.
Oh yeah.
And really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to reach across. Great to see you.
I really appreciate it.
Right on. And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. I'm Mitch Gallagher.